It's impossible to celebrate the brilliance of Ridley Scott without discussing his magnum opus, a movie that transcended cinema and extended its tentacles beyond popular culture. Alien is a film that was largely and wholeheartedly ahead of its time. Today I want to discuss the stunning set design of Alien and just how Ridley Scott redefined the language of science fiction on film. From the opening scene of the film, Scott achieves many things. The most fascinating, however, is how he establishes a queasiness and fear in the audience while also maintaining a palpable sense of intrigue through the set design alone. Why Alien works so well as a science fiction thriller is because Scott abandoned the spectacular aesthetic of sci-fi cinema that so often halts narrative progression to fetishize special effects. You need look no further than the shot of the USS Enterprise at the start of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the final reveal of the mothership in Close Encounters, or any incarnation of the Death Star in Star Wars to understand this point. Scott's brilliance in directing Alien derives from the fact that he so happily established a new form of science fiction grammar. In fact, this visual grammar would later be echoed and mimicked in films such as The Matrix and Red Planet. Instead of being outside and exploring the world as sci-fi often wants us to do, we're largely stuck inside the run-down, twisted corridors of a ship. That immediately works as a way of Scott installing a fear and uneasiness in the audience that is quite poetic and revolutionary. In the same year of shooting, John Carpenter's Panaglide opening of Halloween and the Steadicam of Kubrick's The Shining had already become cinematic norms. Scott's camera, though, rarely stays static. It's always sliding away from what it reveals as if appalled. Yet it also slides away in a slithering manner that the creature is renowned to do. Quickly, tension escalates despite this being only a handful of minutes into the film. How fear is built, though, largely derives from the camera prowling around the empty spaces of the Nostromo ship, a battered, truly ugly spacecraft. Unlike the aforementioned Death Star or USS Enterprise, it drifts around these corridors in hesitant glides, unsure of what's around the corner. The point of view wobbles and shakes slightly, rejecting an otherwise smooth trajectory. In fact, Scott's camera is always wobbling in this film. It's almost a meta way of mimicking the fear and nervousness in the characters and transmitting that to the audience in an organic manner. The emblematic architecture lends itself beautifully to Scott's camera: the corridor, the duct, and the tunnel. In sci-fi, corridors are typically pristine, lavish, and shiny. Once again, just a quick glance at Star Wars or Star Trek reinforces this. But Scott, much like with his ever-moving camera, rejects the era and genre's cinematic formula and instead opts for a murky look to manipulate the camera around. For one, Scott demanded that the set be built from scrap electrical equipment and dismantled aircraft. His demands adhered to by the set design team and eventually the studio. It's a typical Ridley Scott set though, busy, layered, lit low, and gleaming with information. The closer to the creatures we get, the more barracky and organic the interiors become. Rather than build an enormous ship, they developed a model. To make it look big, Scott used his two sons and friend to make the actors in suits look small. This essentially achieved two things. One, as aforementioned, it gives the illusion of the model looking enormous, but it also emphasizes how far out of depth these characters are in a world they do not understand. It emphasizes that they have gone from predators in their own world to tantalizing prey for the ungodly creatures prowling around, a real testament to Scott's economic visual storytelling. The film constantly goes from loud, deafening sounds to utter silence, with characters staring pensively into space. In the chest-bursting scene, for example, Scott and Goldsmith do something interesting. The soundtrack rises from 55 beats per minute to 110. This mimics the anxiety and fear of the characters and of their heartbeats. In a meta way, the soundtrack rises to a climax in tandem with the audience and characters, which achieves this effective kind of emotional contagion and bliss. Much like the thumping of a heart, yes, but it could also mirror the creature wriggling and struggling to burst out of Kane's chest. 20 minutes into the film, we get this gorgeous shot of the back of a helmet. It could simply have just been the back of the helmet, sure, but Scott designed it to look entirely different. It has scales and looks eerily similar to the iconic design of the creature. Thus, for a brief moment, the audience's hearts tighten, especially since the score is vibrating with quite an atmospheric sound. From that moment onwards, if we weren't already, We as the audience live in constant fear throughout the entirety of Alien, because as the film goes on to establish, any character could be picked off at any moment. Silence, as per Scott's subverting of science fiction grammar, equals the sheer opposite of restlessness. It's the precise moment where the audience gather in the palm of his hand as his fingers proceed to crush us. What's impressive about Scott's direction of Alien though is he does not fetishize the creature and endeavour to reveal the thing in all its glory. In fact, he rarely reveals the alien. Instead, he shows us these scattered glimpses of all the stages of the creature, from the egg to the face hugger and eventually the main thing. It represents the fast and brutal life cycle of the creature, but we only get jarring, disconnected snapshots of these developmental stages. The gaps that remain ensure that it ensnares the audience in terrified speculation. Scott carefully constructed a tactic where the most important thing is not what you see, but the effect of what you think you saw. It's like a sort of horrific afterburn. Most science fiction of this time would revel in the creature, yet Scott thought it fitting to let it breathe and cause havoc from afar. One can infer that Scott never had an idea of showing the creature in its final form for long periods of time. The focus was always on how brutal its developmental stage is. Renowned for his artful mind and in-depth storyboarding, Scott actually drew inspiration for the creature from the Francis Bacon triptych titled 3 Studies for Figures at the Base of Crucifixion. This ultimately reveals that Scott's mindset was always in projecting the developmental stages of Bacon's panel in his own film. Rather than fetishizing a final form, Scott tantalizingly plays with the growth of the creature. Perhaps it's here where Scott subverts the grammar of sci-fi most. Dallas's death is a fine example of this. As the ducts are sealed behind him, the apertures close like the diaphragm of a camera. Another stellar nugget of this gorgeous set design that emphasizes the claustrophobia of the picture. He's trapped in the mechanism of a camera that pulls focus elsewhere, yet never on him. In his last moments, he is hemmed into this entirely enclosing frame. Scott corners him, much like he corners his audience, into witnessing sheer fear. In those tubes, we don't know which way is up or down, backwards or forwards. Lambert screams that the alien is coming at Dallas, but Dallas sees nothing except the last flash. A shocking glimpse of the creature. His blip then disappears from the sensors, and again Scott seemingly focuses on a glimpse and idea of the creature, keeping the audience in a constant state of uneasiness. Here's the thing about science fiction though. One of the things we remember most are worlds, languages, characters of different intergalactic races. Therefore, the typical grammar of science fiction is one that utilizes its characters' dialogue to build the world. What does that say about Alien then? A film that largely restricts its moments of dialogue and removes a pre-established hierarchy between characters. When the crew finally interact, about 10 minutes into the film, it's a cacophony of overlapping dialogue that ensues. This ensures an establishing of chaos beyond the fear of the unknown. It plays toward an instability in this crew and is a viable nod toward them being picked off one by one as the film grows in runtime. After all, this chaotic clashing of sounds indicates that any chance of the crew working together is null. One of my favourite components of Scott's direction is that despite being set inside a ship, no hierarchies are established and no real chain of command. What this does is force the audience to fear for every character equally, since everyone's importance is on a level platform. They could all be collateral damage, no one has a pass to the final act. That fear and that tightening tension is largely derived from Scott's insistence on there being very little military and hierarchical talk. Just take a look at Brett and Parker, two resentful co-workers that resist orders, defy authority in every muttered syllable and every painfully slow gesture. They have no respect for Dallas's office, for no one. No respect for Mother's instructions, despite the set design dictating that this be the most regal and authoritative area of the otherwise downtrodden Nostromo. Ridley Scott's masterful direction of Alien remains one of the finest pieces of the craft in the history of cinema. Not only did he create a masterpiece, he also redefined the language and grammar of science fiction on screen. One of the greatest achievements in organic practical effects, and a testament to the genius of the man's mind.